Susan, what was my tombstone phrase? No, I replaced it with something else. Yeah, let me tell you something. Sandy Wolf, who I talked to for 40 years every day, he finally said to me after 40 years, he said, Jeffrey, there's one thing I can tell you about yourself. You're you're never right, but you're sure. And he said, that's what you should put on your tombstone. He was never right, but he was sure. My parents, my mother, all she cared about really was making sure she wasn't late to her mahjong and her canasta games and her tennis and her golf. And my dad was more concerned with trying to make a living. They weren't huggy, kissy type people, but they demonstrated it in many other ways. One thing that keeps standing out in my memory is that I was at the playground half my life. Across the street from where we lived, there was a school, Glenridge, and across the street was a playground. And that's where every kid in town gathered. And there weren't a parent in sight other than my dad coming over with his red house shoes and standing at the fence. And he started commenting from the side of the fence what I should or shouldn't be doing in these playground games. The reason why that's good and bad is that he was the only parent that took an interest in even doing it. But was bad, maybe he made a few little comments about our play that maybe he should have just kept quiet. Most of the people thought I was a great athlete and that I tried real hard and I excelled in all the different teams. But most people didn't know that I was what they call a gold bricker and didn't really work too hard at it. I had natural ability, so I didn't feel it was necessary to work out hard. I didn't like the sweat. I didn't like to feel worn out. So I'd like to play the games, but I didn't like the coaching aspect. I didn't like the practices. They just assumed that I beat my brains out to be a good athlete, which is not the case. At the breakfast table, my dad always liked us to tell what we did that day or what he did or some kind of news item. And we'd be sitting there, and I'll never forget it. My mother said something that I didn't like. Don't ask me what it was. It was meaningless, but she said something I didn't like. And I said, will you shut up? And my dad got up from the table, kicked me out of the breakfast room. When I was running upstairs to my bedroom, he was kicking me in the pants all the way up the steps. And I slammed the door and hid in my room. I'll never forget because he told me I will never say shut up to my mother again in my life, which of course I was embarrassed, and he taught me a good lesson there. I get up early in the morning. My brother would sleep till 11:30, and I couldn't stand it because I wanted to nudge him or do something with him. And I'd bang on his door and I'd wake him up. And one time he got so angry he couldn't take it anymore and hit my head against the wall. And I ended up going to the hospital, and my dad started screaming at my brother, but I was the instigator of the whole thing. I remember my dad telling me, if you're going to make money, you have to do it in a honorable way, very high ethics. You can't hurt other people to make money for yourself. He kept stressing ethics. I went to camp in Wisconsin and Indianola, and I had a huge amount of experiences there. I'd be there for 8 weeks in the summer. These are with kids from around the country that you didn't go to school with. There was one experience that I remember that was kind of funny, is that two people that on Friday night, they had a boxing exhibition, and you would pick out somebody that didn't like you and you didn't like them, and then you would box them in front of the camp. Okay, so I didn't know how to box, but there was one kid I didn't like and he didn't like me, so we challenged each other for this boxing match. And so I was being trained by some counselor who was going to show me how to jab and duck and all that other stuff. The boxing match starts all right. You got hundreds of kids circling this boxing arena, and Jeffrey Gitt is in the ring with this guy. I lost all track of what the guy was telling me what to do. My opponent kept hitting me in the nose with his fist, and tears were coming down my, because when you get hit in the nose, your eyes water. So
Right.
I'm sitting there, can't even see what's going on. Everybody's booing. And the kid, he gives me this duck and he jab and he keeps hitting me in the face. And I can't do anything because I forgot everything the guy taught me. So I got frustrated, got him in a headlock, threw him to the mat, and I was disqualified, and the camp booed me. And that was my only fighting match in my history of childhood. But that stands out because I was humiliated. The reason I went in the Army is in those days, either if you got drafted, you go to Vietnam. And I didn't certainly want to go to Vietnam. I went in basic training, and of course, I was always using some medical excuse to get out of everything. And every time there was a forced march at Fort Ord, California, which was in the sand with 80 pounds of stuff on your back, Jeffrey Gitt had no intention of being in that march. So he went, he went into the hospital, and I got myself the typical Gitt excuse, hospital excuse to get out of the march because of my polynidal cyst and my that was supposedly infected. So I give it to this drill sergeant, and he says, "Oh, I see another excuse by Gitt to get out of something. I have a legitimate excuse. Here's a hospital excuse." He says, "I'll tell you what." He says, "You're going to sit on the back of a truck in front of your entire company that has 200 soldiers marching in the sand with their backpacks on, where they do a 21-mile hike, and they're going to guess what they're looking at? You sitting at the back of the truck the entire time." I said, "Oh." I said, so I'm sitting there looking at these people. I have nowhere else to look. They're right behind me. So I get back to the barracks. They destroy my bed. They tip over my cabinets. I'm afraid they're going to attack me in the bathroom. And I started as a private. I ended up as a private 6 years later. Oh my God, what an experience. Since my family had been in real estate 50 years and I saw that they could make a nice living at it, and I knew I could go into an office and actually learn something from college and apply salesmanship to something. I figured that was the best route for me. That's why I really didn't study that hard in college, because I knew exactly I was going to end up in real estate. And I really didn't need their history and their science and their math and their astronomy and everything else they were trying to teach me. As soon as I got out of there, I did do student teaching for 6 months, and the people there said, "This isn't a career for me." They saw that I wasn't going to be the greatest teacher in the world. Spady Elementary School, I lasted 6 months. I'll never forget the lady who had been teaching for 30 years took me aside in the cafeteria, and she says, "You know, Jeff, yeah, is there something else that you're thinking of doing in life?" I said, "Why are you saying that?" She says, "Well, I was in your classroom, and I don't know about this career for you. I think you better go into some other career." So that ended my student teaching, and I went directly to the real estate. My grandfather, Hyman Gitt, came over from Russia, didn't know anything, couldn't even speak English, and was a wallpaper hanger when he started. And because he was a wallpaper hanger in houses, I guess he got the idea that maybe he ought to try to buy a house and fix it and sell it to somebody as another way of making a living for his family. So he ended up starting as a wallpaper hanger. He went into speculating in houses. Then, as the years went on, my dad and my uncle Stanley, they joined him in the business, and that's why it's called Gittin Sons. And as the years went by, then I joined him. Gittin Sons was around for like 100 years. When you come out of college and you don't know much about your profession, nobody really trusts that you know anything or you can do anything. And I learned a valuable lesson about that. You don't have to have book smarts. You have to have common sense and street smarts to be successful. And I knew how to talk. So I, on my own, started looking around for apartments in the area that Gittin Sons was located, which right near there was a street called Sanford in Dogtown, which is right near Forest Park. I saw a whole street of apartments. There were like 75 of them. I fell in love with them. They had this wonderful appeal. They looked like Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And I got obsessed. I said, this is a great place to buy these apartments. So I went out and found out the record owners, and they were a syndicate of the top, most experienced real estate people in St. Louis that owned them. I came into my dad's office. I said, Dad, we're going to buy these apartments from this group. He says, you're going to buy them. You don't know anything. What are you talking about? You're going to go buy them. You out of your mind? You're dealing with the top guys in St. Louis that know everything about apartments. But no, Jeffrey he's going to go buy them. What are you going to buy them for? I said, we're going to buy them and we're going to make a lot of money on them because I don't think they're running the place correctly. They said, how can you make such a crazy statement? These are top people. So I convinced them that I was going to go down and meet the guy. So I rushed downtown, met the head of the syndicate. He was a big shot. And I said, I'll tell you what, sir, I'd like to buy your apartments on Sanford. He said, look, they're not for sale. But even if they were for sale, they would be for sale for a crazy price. And you're not going to be able to afford it. So don't waste my time. I said, I'll tell you what, when's the next meeting you're going to have with your syndicate? And you can discuss it. And then you come up with your crazy price and then give it to me after the next meeting. And I'll tell you if I can pay it. He said, fine. So he goes and I'm waiting for a month for their next meeting. So sure enough, they have their next meeting. I call him up and I said, what's the price? He said, I told you, I brought it up. Everybody laughed and they said, give us $1 million and we'll sell it. And so I pretended in front of him that $1 million was a ridiculous price, even though I knew it wasn't. And why? Because I knew he was under renting those apartments. Instead of getting $130, you should be able to get $230 for those apartments. And I knew I could change those rents into a higher rent, so his price was based on the lower rent. So I said to him, I'll tell you what, you're right. It is a ridiculous price. I'll go back to my dad and beat him on the head and convince the bank to give us a loan and maybe we'll make a deal. He said, okay, see you later. So I go running back to my dad and I spend 2 weeks beating him on the head and Stanley, trying to get him to convince that I know what I'm talking about. And I'm going to go down to Mercantile Bank and get that loan. And so sure enough, I got him beaten up enough that they listened to me and said, if you can get Mercantile to give us a loan, we'll consider it. So I went down to Mercantile, convinced them that my numbers were correct and that they should lend us the money. They lent us the money. And I went back to the syndicate guy and I said, yeah, you're right. Here's instead of $1 million, we're going to give you 980,000 just to get some reduction so that my dad will go along with it. So sure enough, he says, okay, we'll do it. When he told me he would do it, I was going back in my GTO convertible at that time, back to Clayton from downtown, celebrating in my car, knowing that I just made a ton of money because I knew what I could do with that place. And sure enough, we closed. Within 1.5 years, we had doubled the rent. We had already convinced 2 of our family friends to buy some of the buildings on the street and ended up owning, out of 72 units, we owned 36 of them for free because when we sold the other 36, we were in the others for nothing. My dad scratched his head. My uncle scratched their head. They couldn't believe what was happening. They just made $1 million basically at Jeffrey Gittsky, who knew nothing, but saw a vision that the other people didn't see. That was the biggest event of my early real estate conviction that you don't have to be a Harvard graduate to be successful. I only went to like 2 hockey games in my life because it was too cold in there. And I wasn't a big fan of hockey, but I sat next to this older woman and she's knitting. So after about an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. So I said to her, Miss, let me ask you something. Why are you sitting here knitting? You haven't looked up yet. You haven't seen one play. This these tickets are expensive. She looks at me and says, first of all, what businesses are yours that I'm knitting? I said, well, I don't know. I just feel it's strange that you're not even paying attention to the game. I said, why do you come? She says, my husband wants me to sit next to him. Who cares? You're not paying for the tickets. I said, well, you won't have to worry about me because I won't be here anymore. I'm done. I said, this will be my last hockey game. She said, good. You can leave before that.
He's a very funny person. He doesn't even try to be, not like trying to make jokes. It's just he is a funny person. Just the things that come out of his mouth, people that I know that know him say he's hilarious. I remember being locking me in the room and crawling out the window. Yeah, I had a personality. Yeah, I couldn't have been. He probably is like my Naftali. It's probably payback. I'm sure he had his hands full with me, and running around the dining room table trying to catch me could be a good example. Must have been hard to be a father to me. He has a very awareness of integrity. Everything he does, I see how he treats clients and how he treats everyone. Yeah, he has his he has his way of doing things, and the bottom line is he would never ever cheat anyone, and that's a highly admirable attribute to have. There's a real estate deal, a construction project that we did together many years ago. And most people, including myself, I said, just declare bankruptcy. He would not have it. He wouldn't do it. And so he still has this loan that he's been paying and paying and paying, even though that it's caused financial strain. And my intention is, of course, to pay him back. But he's been carrying the bill for all these years. And I think that's a very admirable attribute. And just fail the bank, okay, bye. I'll just start up a new chapter in my life. The other thing, being a father of five, and I see how busy I am with 5 kids, and growing up, like ping pong, we play pool pretty much every night. I mean, I remember he'd always be on his phone, and yeah, I might have had to pull him away from that phone. He had 2 lines, but at the end of the day, he'd play tennis with me every day if I wanted to. Going to the tournaments, having that support, that must have been a huge sacrifice. So in terms of having a support system was huge. I didn't realize it back then, but playing your tournament, no one's watching you. That wouldn't be the same as if you have one of your parents or both of your parents watching you. And that meant a lot. That's something I look up to, something that I need to work on myself and see, wow, he really spent a lot of time with his kids. So those are 2 things that really stand out. I have a lot of respect for Dad.
I have many fond memories of my childhood, but the ones that really stick in my mind always end in disaster. I remember coming home from 40 Legends camp and being super excited to show off my camping skills. So I asked my dad if he would take me and my brother on a camping trip. Luckily, he agreed, even though my dad's idea of the outdoors is sitting in a screened in porch reading the paper, as far away from mosquitoes and anything else nature has to offer. But to his credit, he took us, and we're sitting there fishing on the side of the bank of the river. And all of a sudden, we see Andrew floating down the river in the current. I guess he was upstream fishing with my dad's friend, and my dad had to rush into the water and pull him out. The entire trip, it was raining. I'm talking about sheets and sheets of water, just deluging the whole place. Our campground was flooded. We were surrounded by all of these RVs. Keep in mind, I was thinking we were going to some nature preserve wilderness, and we're sitting basically in a parking lot surrounded by RVs. It's pouring down rain. The fire pit is full of water. It's like a puddle. I was crying. I couldn't even start a fire and show off all these new skills that I had gained. And the entire trip was quite the fiasco. We ended up leaving early and going home, and I was in tears. Another story I remember is going to my first Cardinal baseball game with my dad. We got there early. I had brought my glove and a ball so we could get it autographed by some of the players. We went down and got the autographs and then went back and sat. As we're watching the game, I was taking the ball and just tossing it in my glove, as a kid would do. And I missed my glove, and the ball rolled like 10 to 15 rows ahead of us. Some woman had picked up the ball. So I go down there and I ask the woman for the ball, and she absolutely refuses to give me the ball. She's like, no, it's my ball now. And I think I was like 10. So I'm crying. I run back up to my dad. I'm all in tears, all upset. And he's like, "Oh, she's just playing with you. Just go down there. She give you the ball. She's just pulling your leg." So I kind of stop my crying. I go back down. I ask her again. She absolutely flat out refuses. So then I go back up. Now I'm just all over the place crying. And my dad is all upset. He goes down there, starts yelling at the woman, "What the hell's the matter with you? What, you're not going to give the kid his ball?" And so they have this altercation. And finally she said, "Oh, you want this ball? This ball?" And she takes the ball and chucks it as hard as she can behind her, maybe 15, 20 rows, and almost hits this guy in the head. And then dad has to go up and get the ball from that guy. And then he starts yelling at him. It was quite the fiasco. And how could I forget going to Soulard Market trying to sell silk flower arrangements one Saturday? My dad used to own this silk flower business that made flower arrangements. And for some strange reason, he thought this would be a great idea to sell silk fake flowers at a fresh farmer's market. We set up a stall and we were there all day, people coming and going, tons of people buying all kinds of fresh flowers and fruits and vegetables. We didn't sell not one flower arrangement. So by the late afternoon, dad's getting frustrated and he starts yelling at the people.
"Ah, your flowers will be dead in a week." I said, "You better buy the artificial ones we got." She says, "What are you talking about?" She says, "I don't like artificial." I said, "Oh, put some perfume on the things." It'll be fine. And she told me to get lost. And then you went and you were hiding because you were so embarrassed. You said, "I'm getting out of here." And we never sold one thing at Soulard. I was trying to convince the people they were getting ripped off. Their flowers would be dead in a week. Mine would last a lifetime.
Meanwhile, I'm shrinking down, cowering, trying to hide, so embarrassed for the whole experience. But the common thread in all of these stories is the huge amount of time and energy dad invested in being a good dad to me. All the evenings playing ping pong and pool after dinner in the basement, or all the afternoons when we were playing catch in the backyard or shooting baskets, all the time to teach me to play tennis and other sports. I've learned a ton from you, and not just in sports and those kind of physical activities, but just by watching your example, all of the various businesses you started, running movie theaters to silk flower companies to airport parking lots to all the various real estate dealings. You really showed me how to be an entrepreneur, how to take risk, how to experiment, and how to believe in yourself, and how to sell a vision. I've learned a tremendous amount and incorporate a lot of those ideas in my life. And most importantly, you taught me how to admit when I'm wrong and own my mistakes and act with integrity. And I really appreciate all the lessons that you've taught me. Thanks, Dad. I love you.
Then I met Susan at a coffee shop. I just happened to see her. She was drinking coffee with some other guy there, and I was with a group of guys. And I looked over there and I said, "Wait a minute, who is that?" And because she was very attractive, I didn't know who she was. So I asked a friend, "Who is that?" And they told me who it was and that she was getting a divorce. I said, "Well, I'd like to see if I can go out with her, that's for sure." I talk a lot in these coffee shops, and she overheard me talking about a movie. And I was telling everybody how fabulous the movie was, and she overheard it, and she's a movie buff. So she comes over to the table and says, "What movie were you telling your friends about?" I didn't know she would even come over. She wasn't coming over really just to listen to what the movie was. And so I told her the movie. It turned out it won the Academy Award that year because I know what I'm talking about with movies. So she went to see it, and she comes back the next week and says, "That movie you talked about was phenomenal. Really loved that movie that you were talking about." I said, "I told you it was a good movie." And so then I finally got the nerve to see if she'd go out on a date. She says, "No dinner, but I'll go to lunch with you." It was safer. So I took her to some Indian restaurant off of Lindbergh that she said she liked. We had lunch, and when we were getting in the car, I said, "Well, can I ask you out again?" She says, "No, I'll call you. Don't call me." So I figured that's the end of that date. And then I got hit in the eye with a tennis ball, and she heard that I got hit in the eye, and she had sympathy on me. So she told some doctor friend of hers who's an eye doctor to to call and check on my eye injury. When I called her to thank her, I said, how about going out again when I'm out of this hospital? She said, okay, I'll go out with you again. And then that was it.
When I first met him and I saw that he was unusual, he's an unusual guy. He's one of those guys who grows on you. He's a character. And when you're not with him for a while, and believe me, there are many times when I couldn't wait to get to my kids and stay a week or two. I couldn't wait. But you do start missing him. And even people at the coffee shop, they can't stand him. They want to get rid of him. But then they start calling him up. Come back. We miss you. We miss you. He grows on you. And I'll tell you something else about him that I admire. Some people don't like it, but I admire it. He's not afraid to tell you exactly what he's thinking. He comes off rough and gruff. You know how he comes off. But the guy is a teddy bear. He is sweet. You give him a kiss and he's happy as can be. I think that's the biggest thing, is that he comes across rough around the edges. And when you get past that, he really isn't like that. He's a good partner and he's a good friend. He really is. He cries at commercials. Go figure. Okay. He cries during the movies. You know, if somebody's really doing a great dance on the movies, or if it's a coming of age, he's crying his eyes out. Okay. But the story that I want to tell you is about Charlie. He loved Charlie. And Charlie, as you know, got sick. And Jeff had to take him to a vet who happens to be a very good friend, one of our closest friends. And the vet called one day after Charlie was there for a couple of days getting all kinds of tests and stuff. And he said, he's got cancer. You know, it's just, we're going to put him down. So Jeff said, okay, whatever we have to do. And he said to me, do you want to go one last time and visit Charlie? I said, of course. So we get to the vet's office and Charlie's in a cage and they open the cage. And I'm crying my eyes out at that time. I'm crying my eyes out because I love Charlie too. And your dad didn't cry. He saw that Charlie had sleep in his eyes and he took the sleep out of Charlie's eyes, which was your dad's way of telling him he loved him, you know? So everybody's got their own way. Every time I say that story, I start to cry because it's a meaningful story. That's your dad.
I was on the track team at University of Missouri as a shot putter. And Jeff came out as a javelin thrower. So that's how we first met. So Jeffrey is throwing the javelin. And he's practicing like crazy. And he takes the javelin and he throws it into where the runners were actually running. And by mistake, it missed one of the runners. It was like probably about 10 feet away from where the runners were. The coach comes up to Jeffrey and says, Jeffrey, I want you to go up in the hill where they practice football. I never want to see you again. So that's how we met. He tells a story like no one can tell a story. He gives you every detail of every pain, of every struggle that he ever went through, and he lays it out on you for all the time. So if you're going to listen to a story from him, you've got to be prepared to take some time, because he's going to really embellish it like crazy. But the way he presents it is amazing. We used to go fishing a lot. I would go and call him and pick him up, and we would go early in the morning. And I kept telling Jeffrey, I said, we're going to get on the road at 4 a.m. You hear me? 4 a.m. I don't want to be waiting for you. I don't want to be there and all this kind of stuff. So comes 4 a.m. and I forgot to set my alarm. And he's out in front of his house waiting for me to pick him up. And I didn't get there until like 7 o'clock in the morning, because by the time he got in there and he called me and I got dressed and put the fishing gear, then we went fishing on the Merrimack River. We rented a boat and we're going down the river. We're fishing. All of a sudden, it is the biggest rainstorm you've ever seen in your entire life. It seemed like the whole Merrimack River had picked up about 5 feet worth of water coming down, and we are scared to death because there's lightning and everything else. And so we go to the bank to throw our line up to a tree and lock it up. We're crawling out of the river, trying to get up this embankment, and it's complete mud. Both of us were sliding down the embankment of the Merrimack River, trying to catch a fish. And needless to say, and on every one of these trips, we never caught a fish.
Not one fish.
Not one
my
fish.
God.
He's a tremendous competitor. He never wants to lose. He doesn't know what it's like to lose. I don't know if most people know that or not, but I certainly knew it. It was always good to have him on your team. We're playing in the club championship for tennis. And we're playing these two guys, young fellas that were probably 10 years younger than we were, but we were winning pretty good. The ball comes to me, and I was playing the net, and I was going to kill the ball and win the tournament. Meanwhile, I missed the shot. We lost the tournament, and Jeffrey's yelling at me, Lazaroff, get off the court. I'd rather play him myself. You're doing me absolutely no good whatsoever. I'll play him myself from here on out. So those are my recollections. Listen, he had a sweetheart. He's always as honest as the day is long, and you can trust what he has to say. And he's just a loyal, great guy. You couldn't ask for a better friend. You're going to get me to tear up a little bit.
I was in high school and I worked at City Coffee. I was a barista there.
Uh-huh.
And that was your dad's current like coffee shop of the minute. I guess he didn't like the latte that I made, and Brian, he let me have it. Okay. The full scope of Jeffrey J. Gitt. He came up and he said, this is the worst latte I have ever had in my whole life. And you're a terrible barista. He gave me like a brow beating. Okay. Fast forward 3 days. I find out from one of my coworkers that he's met my mom at City Coffee and they're going on a date.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly. That was my exact reaction. My mom didn't tell me and she told me everything. And I was like, wait, are you kidding? By the way, I tasted afterwards and was delicious. Fast forward many years later, he's like, the latte was fine. He's made amends and apologized for it. So my mom, my sister, and I, we walked Oscar to the dog bakery. We got him some dog treats. We walked home and we had to go somewhere, so we left. When we came home, the dog treats were gone. And we're like, did Oscar like somehow get them? They were like all the way back on the counter. Jeff ate the dog treats.
Oh, no.
He thought they were cookies. He's like, I thought
goodness.
those cookies tasted like a little bland.
And he ate all of them? He ate more than
He
one?
ate all of them. And there were a lot of dog treats in there, man. He just ate the whole bag. And he's like, I thought they tasted like kind of bland. They weren't your mom's best. I came home from college and he went to get a haircut. You know, your dad is very like persnickety with the grooming and his hair and all of that. It's like a very big deal. And I guess like his eyebrows had grayed and like they weren't white, but they had grayed a lot, just like the rest of his hair. So he came back from the hairdresser. Brian, his eyebrows were red. He let the girl, he let this girl dye his eyebrows. And because they were so white, they didn't look like normal, like they were red, like Little Orphan Annie red. And I was like, oh, Jeff, that cannot, that's not going to stay, right? Like that's going to fade and I was like peeing in my pants. I was laughing so hard. I was like, did you look in the mirror before you left the salon? Did you see what they looked like? And he's like, oh, his famous line. He's like, now they've done it to me. Now they've done it to me. Jeff is a lot softer than people know. He is really warm and he is really loving in his way. He cares about people. I mean, he'll tell you he doesn't. He's like, those nincompoops. I don't care about anybody. But he really does. He cares deeply about his family and he wants the best for us. And it's not like overly apparent because like he's like a diamond in the rough, you know, he's so brash on the outside, but he is really loving and kind and caring. And I think that he doesn't show that side to the world very often, but when you get like a glimpse of it, it's really nice.
Oh,
really.
yeah.
Jeff is a really smart, really wise guy. And one of the things that I most admire about him, that I'm actually trying to teach my own kids, is that a great man admits when they're wrong. He'll say, you know what? You were right. And I really admire that about Jeff. He can admit when he's wrong. And I think that's incredible. I learned a lot from him, but really to do your best and to admit when you're wrong. I feel really lucky. I was worried that maybe both my parents wouldn't choose second spouse as well, but they really did. My mom and Jeff, for all their bickering and their arguing, and they really do love each other. And I give Jeff a lot of credit. We Horn women are a lot to put up with. We are, I know it. Jeff has been thoughtful and kind, and he is a wonderful second dad to me, really. I love him.
I remember the first time I met him very vividly. My mom took me to go play tennis with your dad, which was obviously like a huge mistake. I went to tennis camp as a kid just to get the lemonade at the break. I was not the kid that was playing tennis. So the fact that we went to go play tennis with your dad was the first time that I met him. Was not the best impression of me because I'm whiny and I'm not good at sports and I'm 13 maybe, but he was tough and he was trying to give me pointers on what to do. He was nice and funny and he just seemed very assertive, like he was going to be around for a while. And so I just looked at my mom and I was like, I could totally see you marrying this guy. With Jeffrey J. Gitt, what you see is what you get. And I love that about him. The pivotal moment that I remember was the time that I realized I was going to start calling him dad. Not because he has replaced my father in any way, but because he's been such a big father figure for me. I mean, he came around when I was 13. I'm so lucky. And that's why I chose to have two father-daughter dances at my wedding. I had one with my biological father and I had one with your dad, which was embarrassing and wonderful all at the same time. Every time I think about your dad dancing, I can't help myself but laugh. And I know that he took dance lessons and he thinks that he's the greatest. I mean, he thinks that he's the greatest about everything. And it is just a laugh out loud riot to watch him dance. He always just answers the phone, even if it's not ringing. Yes, sir. Mr. President, sir. Yes. This is Jeffrey J. Gitt. Oh, I've got your next deal right here. Oh, okay. $100 million. You got it. And then you click. The phone wasn't even on. I would say that the main thing that he taught me is to accept responsibility for your mistakes. He is the first person always to admit when he did something wrong and never to be ashamed about the fact that you did something wrong. Just admit it and move on. Figure out what the process is now to move on from your mistakes. So teaching a teenager to own their own mistakes, I think, is a very difficult thing to do, but leading by example, he definitely did that. I love him so much. And I'm just so lucky that he's in my life.
Jeff is an early to bed, early riser. I don't know if he subscribes to 4 newspapers or whatever, and he's got these news things that pop up on his phone. He'll spend the first part of his day in a coffee shop reading all the newspapers. And then he'll call me, give me a doomsday report that Russia now has a weapon that we have no defense for. So we're goners. It's over for us. Or he'll say, China has a new virus that is 10 times more deadly than the coronavirus. So we're goners. He told me, if you have any money in the bank, you got to get it out of the bank because a year from now, it'll be worth nothing. Well, thanks, Jeff. I always enjoy starting my day with these kind of nice reports from you. There's an old movie called Grumpy Old Men where Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon play these two guys, and all they do is yell at each other. I wouldn't say Jeff and I do nothing but yell at each other, but the basis of our friendship is tearing each other down. Jeff will call me and say, "What'd you do today?" I'll say, "Oh, I played golf." "Oh, what'd you shoot?" So if I shot a good score, he'd say, "Well, I guess you probably picked the easiest course in St. Louis, obviously." We'd talk about our tennis days, and I would tell him how bad his backhand was, how weak his serve was. He would tell me powder puff my shots were, and oh yeah, whenever you were losing, you'd always claim your shoulder was hurting, that kind of thing. And then another thing he liked to do is, let's say he'd see somebody on TV, like a professional tennis match or whatever, and he'd call me and he'd say, "Do you realize what these pros would do to you?" But when I say we tear each other down, he tears himself down as much as he tears me down. So he's very self-deprecating. He tells a lot of stories on himself. So in that way, he may be more modest than a lot of people think, or that they may know. I mean, he'll even tell stories about what a chicken he is. One that he tells that just cracks him up is when he and Susan were going for a walk in Forest Park, and they were getting to an area of the park that was very wooded. And as they were coming along this path, there were some ducks or geese that looked a little bit aggressive. They were honking. So Jeff very subtly slides over to the other side of Susan so that she is the one closest to the ducks. And Susan says, "Did you just push me toward those ducks?" And Jeffrey had to admit it. But he says, that's how chicken I am.
The regrets is when you have some kind of natural ability. It doesn't have to be sports. It could be music. It could be studies. Who knows what it is? If you happen to be good at something, you don't waste it by goofing around and not applying yourself properly to even get yourself to be better. That was a regret. I was a goof off on all my sports and could have been much better than I was. I didn't use my ability that I have to be better. I also did not live up to what my dad told me to study hard. I goofed off on there too because I thought I was going in real estate and I really didn't need all those other subjects in college or high school to do well in real estate. So I failed in those two categories. Taking shortcuts to everything and not applying yourself properly is a very poor trait to have. I know that I have it. So that's the problem. But I'm at least willing to admit it. I think what's been instilled in me, and it's run through my whole life, is just to use your entrepreneurship to be creative, structure things through creativity or experimental, and not be afraid to fail at anything. And most people I know, they're scared to death of failing or losing all their money or whatever, so they don't try anything. I was always a gambler, whether it was in stocks, whether it was trying different businesses. I don't regret trying any of those things, even though I failed at probably 50% of them that were not related to real estate. Anything in real estate, I didn't really fail. If I failed in something in real estate, it wasn't necessarily because of me. The economy failed. I've tried a lot of experimentation in my life. I've gone a lot of places. I've done a lot of things. So I don't really regret anything that I've really missed. I've been kicked out of a few coffee shops, but every time I'm kicked out, 2 or 3 years later, when I bump into the people, they invite me to come back because it's too boring without me. They all want me to come back, and I refuse to come back because they didn't want me in the first place. And now that they miss me, they want me to come back. So I stay by myself at other places now. Grateful because most people in our family have their health and seem to be happy, and they're doing what they want to do. They're so far we haven't had any tragedies. And I got to knock on wood. Wait a minute. That's probably the best thing that could happen.
What do you think happens to you after you die?
People talk about how miserable I was.